Timer is rolling. 5, 4, 3.
Greetings. I'm James Preston Allen, publisher of Random Lengths News, and it is Valentine's Day today. And the heart of the matter of today is an interview with LA County Supervisor Janice Hahn, who is running for re-election on the March 5th, Tuesday, the March 5th ballot. And we've had many conversations over the years, but what we really need to know at this point, actually, is why did you get into politics in the first place, Miss Hahn?
Hi, James. Nice to be with you on Valentine's Day.
Yes.
I really don't celebrate this holiday, but I'm glad to be with you. Mm-hmm. Why did I get into politics? Good question. Well, I think it has something to do with my DNA. My father, Kenny Hahn, was a longtime elected official in Los Angeles County. I think 46 years he was an elected official. He was county supervisor like me for 40 years. I had an Uncle Gordon who was on the city council in Los Angeles and also was in the state assembly. My brother James, my older brother James, was the city controller, the city attorney, and the elected city mayor. So I think it had something to do with my upbringing. My brother and I watched my dad be a public servant. He would take us around on Saturdays to meet his constituents. It was not unusual on a Saturday morning for people to knock on our door, and my dad would invite them in and find out what their problem was. And he had a little notebook, and he said, "I'll take care of this on Monday." So it seemed to me like that was a noble profession. You can help people. So I think the fact that I was the girl, though, left me a little challenged, and I had some barriers to running for office myself. My brother was kind of the heir apparent to the Hahn political dynasty, and he was kind of given all the resources and help and mentoring to follow into my father's footsteps. I, on the other hand, took a very
circuitous route.
Thank you. I was a classroom teacher. I worked in the trash industry. I worked in the shopping center industry. I actually was an investment banker for a few years in public finance. And I worked for an investor-owned utility company, Southern California Edison. But finally, I think, kind of hit me in my heart that I thought, what am I doing? This is what I want to do. I want to go into public service. I'm going to run for office. I lost the first time. But, I knew.
And the second time you ran was when?
Well, the second time I ran was for Congress. I lost that race too. I finally won for the Charter Reform Commission in 1997, which was an obscure commission in the city of Los Angeles, which was going to rewrite the city charter. That's where I actually had a front row seat to city government. I wrote the book on city government. And that's where I championed things like neighborhood councils, I championed area planning commissions, and I championed having a local resident sit on the Harbor Commission and the Airport Commission, because many of us felt like, particularly at the port, those commissioners lived in the valley, they lived West LA, they would make decisions that impacted our lives down here.
But they didn't know what it was like to live here.
They would get in their cars and drive off after the meeting.
So tell me something. Who was the first newspaper to ever endorse you for office?
Well, I think it was the Random Lengths newspaper, and then it was the Sentinel was close after that. So you've been with me a long time.
Which year was that for the charter race, or was it for city council?
I don't remember, James.
Okay.
Do you?
Frankly, I don't. But I know it was in the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it must have been the charter reform. Yeah. And I think because I was running for the People's Charter, there was an appointed charter commission that was appointed by the city council who did not want any kind of shared power. Right. And then there was the elected ones. And I think you saw in me someone who would champion the people's voice.
Right.
I forgot that.
And Now, you're one of your brother's proteges, Tim McCosker, who is now the city council person in the very same seat that you were in, is promoting the idea of another charter reform. And it has come to my awareness that a lot of that has to do with expanding the city council itself and addressing all of the problems that since your time in office have been created by the city in terms of controlling and or manipulating the neighborhood council system. Many of the people who followed you in office
Didn't love neighborhood councils as much as I did.
that's putting it politely. I would say that they were adversarial to the concept of listening to the neighborhood constituents because it went contrary or oftentimes got in the way of large developers and their contributions to certain city councilmen, which has gotten numerous city councilmen indicted in the last few years.
Sadly.
Any thoughts on money in politics?
Well, yeah, there's too much money in politics. It's very difficult to run for office without having to raise money from the very people who probably have an interest in doing business in front of the very entity that you're running for. Most average people don't make contributions to politicians, but people who have an interest in what you're doing will. Until we have 100% public financing of candidates running for office, there will always be money in politics. And then we have, of course, the independent expenditures, where there's really no transparency or accountability. So that still exists. And I think, voters get frustrated and confused. They get stacks of political mail, and it's only if you read the fine print on where the mailing address is that you understand who's behind it and who's trying to support a particular candidate. But I've been in this business, a long, long time, and I do know that it's probably the most difficult thing for candidates to raise money, and it's hard for new people to break into politics who don't have the network that maybe
or the name recognition.
Or the name recognition. Now, I'm really lucky. My dad always said the name Hahn was worth $1 million. That was before inflation. So
if you factor in inflation, it's worth 20 million now.
Yeah, so it is true that my name, it's not just that people recognize the name Hahn. I think it stands for something. I think my dad stood for something. I think my brother did.
Okay, so let me stop you. What do you think the brand name Janice Hahn stands for in local government today?
I think the number one thing that my name stands for is accessibility. I think people know that they can see me in the grocery store, run into me at church, see me around town, see me walking the restaurants and the art galleries on First Thursdays here in San Pedro. People know they can talk to me. People drop stuff off at my home. People give me notes at Starbucks. Before I get there, the barista will go, "Oh, this person came in and they have a constituent complaint for you." So I think Janice Hahn means to people, hopefully, integrity and honesty. But I think what people really want is accessibility to their elected officials without having to be one of those major donors. And I think people feel that way about me. I think that's one of my hallmark signature brands.
So I'll tell you the hardest thing for a person in my position to gauge in interviewing a politician. And that is what their core values are that make them either trustworthy or at least honorable to their word. Uh, Most of the time when people get in front of a camera like this, a politician, or anybody else for that matter, when you ask them who they are and what they really stand for, will tell you almost everything that they think you want to hear. Okay? That that is the biggest challenge that a journalist has, or any person that is trying to gauge the the real intent of somebody that wants to run for office. Because, on my mind, most of the people who are running for public office are somewhat delusional. Okay. They will tell you they're going to win, even if they never have a chance of winning.
Yeah.
And I believe that when you first ran for office, it was quite aspirational. But for some reason, I trusted you. Okay? And that trust has borne out multiple times over the course of your career. And I will give our viewers this one incident that explained to me your what I think is the expression of your core values.
What is it, James?
You remember the time that we were sitting at Campagnon having a glass of wine after work.
Uh-oh, where's this going?
And I mentioned something about the creating the homeless shelter down at the closed LA County Health Department building.
Bacon building.
And I said, there's a whole campground of homeless people there.
Sleeping down the streets.
And you got up, marched out the door, and this was, after dark at night, and you marched down to this homeless encampment and said, I have to go visit my people. And I felt obligated to go down and to go with you, but you got there minutes before I did, and you were already out of your car, already talking to the people, the homeless people on the street, and felt quite safe and comfortable dealing with the folks on the street. And I think it came to you at that point that, yes, there was this need to actually make that building into a shelter and to take these people off of the street, even against the wishes of some other politicians in this area, and against perhaps the wishes of some of the constituents.
And do you remember what I wanted to find out when I talked to those individuals when they were either in a tent or in a sleeping bag? Do you remember the question I asked them?
I do not.
I said, would you come inside? If I opened this up and made it a shelter, would you come inside? Well, what about my dog? You can bring your dog. What about my girlfriend? You can bring your girlfriend. I wanted to know would they come inside, because there's a narrative out there, still exists, that they don't want help, that people are sleeping on the streets by choice,
right.
that they don't want to, and I wanted to know, and every one of them said, yes, I would come inside. And that's exactly, and in 6 weeks, we turned that vacant building
At a record speed, at an incredibly low budget,
yeah,
and it's still operating today. Now, let's talk about the bigger picture. We just got a report from the county about how many people countywide have been helped. I think it was something like 37,000 plus people. And the first thing that came to my mind is 37,000 people may have been helped. but how many more people
Yeah.
have come onto
Yeah.
the street?
Right.
And what is the annual homeless count going to tell us?
Yeah.
Are we just treading water with this whole thing? Or are we actually making some progress after spending
Billions.
billions of dollars, more than
Ever.
ever? Okay, because actually something happened in San Pedro that actually lit the fire under this whole thing. And part of that was you later building that shelter there
Yeah.
and getting the Chamber of Commerce to
Yes.
endorse it.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Oh my gosh, yes.
You know?
Not only did they endorse them, they brought welcome baskets with blankets and jogging
And
sweats
that was a real
and
turnaround.
bedspreads. Yeah, that was a big turnaround. And I think that's what also probably is a hallmark of me, maybe more than others, is that I like to bring along the community with me. I have a vision. I believe I have leadership qualities, but it's important to me to bring everybody along with me. If I'm going to make a big decision or some sweeping policy, I want to bring people along. And what I found is if I take the time to talk to the stakeholders and answer all their questions, I can see in their eyes the fear starts leaving, the anxiety starts leaving, the negative narrative starts leaving, because I've told them the truth and I'm answering their questions. The same thing happened at the corner of First and Grand, where we bought that hotel,
old hotel,
the Yellow Hotel, and I was turning it into a homeless place for our veterans who were sleeping on our streets in San Pedro. We now have 65 men in there who their lives have been changed. But I also did the same thing that I did with the shelter. I went to the neighborhood council. I even walked the neighborhood behind that hotel and knocked on people's doors. And I said, I just want you to know what we're doing here. I think it's a great idea, because would we rather have our veterans sleeping on the street, or do we want them inside?
Yeah,
Everybody.
Do you want people camped out in
Yeah.
front of your house?
Yeah.
Or
Or-
you want to give them a roof over their
Right,
head?
and when you explain it like that, again, you break down barriers. I went and visited the men on the holidays. Their lives have changed. They talk to me about now they're getting their VA benefits. They're getting transportation to their doctor's appointments. One of them is going back to school at UCLA. They're like, Miss Hahn, you've given us a new lease on life. Because I will tell you, for me, I am that housing first person. I don't think they can get their lives together sleeping on the streets. I want to bring them inside. And I know certain people are like, well, they need to clean their act up, or they need to, have addiction services. I'm like, no, bring them inside, and then let's work on all the issues that they have. That's the chance we have. We got to bring people inside and give them a roof overhead, plus the help and the services.
And the key to what both of those programs are is that you didn't have to wait for building permits.
Correct.
You didn't have to
Correct.
go out and get all of this federal
You're
funding.
right.
But this all came by purchasing or
Correct.
utilizing existing
Correct.
buildings, making sure that they were updated and all that kind of stuff,
Right.
which is much less costly.
Much less costly. It's half the cost and a third of the time to building it from the ground up. It's now costing developers like $600,000 a unit to build housing that's affordable.
Right.
This converting underused hotels and motels and making each room their own little individual apartment is, again, half the cost, a third of the time,
Right.
and it gets people in quicker. I think that's a better way to do it, and I think the county should double down on that effort.
Right. So there was a very interesting interview with a guy on National Public Radio, and he had interviewed. He reported that he had interviewed one of the developers for Los Angeles, whose company normally was in the business of building upscale, high dollar value developments. And he asked the guy, So why is it that your company is so now invested in building, low and moderate income apartment buildings? And he says, because the money's there. And he says, well, wasn't there money there before? And he says, no, it's just basically greed. It's probably the most honest quote that I've heard from the development community. It's just greed. They'll go wherever the money is. And right now, the building cycle is we got to build this kind of thing. And curiously enough, at the very same time that all of this stuff is going on, the leadership in San Pedro in the city of Los Angeles is about to demolish and rebuild the last of the original low-income housing in San Pedro.
Yeah.
The One San Pedro project, the Rancho San Pedro housing project, which is the last of the low-income housing projects in San Pedro. There is one, I believe, a county facility still in Lomita.
Yes, Harbor Hills.
Harbor Hills, which I don't believe is slated for any kind of demolition.
Okay, so on our overreaching goals for addressing the homelessness crisis, one of the places where we're putting more dollars into is preventing people from falling into homelessness, keeping them where they are. If we can keep people where they are, whether it's a mobile home park or public housing or affordable housing, anything, that's a strategy that we are doubling down on. To in any way displace people at this point of this crisis is so short-sighted, in my opinion, which is why during the pandemic, we really helped. We had an eviction moratorium. You can't evict somebody right now because they can't pay rent, because people couldn't pay rent because they'd lost their job, because we in the county, through our health protocols, closed their businesses. Right? So through no fault of their own, they lost their job, they lost their paycheck. We could not afford to have those people become homeless. And we got a lot of pushback from the landlords who felt that wasn't fair. But
and there was a moratorium on rent increases too.
Yes, correct.
Which is just being lifted
It's just
this
been lifted.
year. But let me ask you this.
So we got to keep people where they are.
Do you see a correlation between the escalating cost of real estate and the post-2008 sort of monetization of rental property by large corporations?
Yeah, you really want to go back and look at why we're in this crisis now. You remember 2008. Everybody should rewatch the movie The Big Short.
Right.
Rewatch that movie, everybody. That was the time where there was so much greed with investment bankers, and remember the ninja loans, no job, no income. And they loaned folks money to buy a home. The whole world crashed. That's when, we almost tipped over our economy when Obama first came into office. He was facing a major crisis in our economic stability and underpinnings in this country.
The exchange, the overnight exchange between banks almost froze.
I mean, you think about the Merrill Lynch's, the big boys that went under. But some of these people never recovered, and they're the ones we're seeing now that have never gotten back on their feet. And I remember being pretty upset that Congress bailed out the banks, but did not bail out the people.
Yeah, the individual homeowners.
And the individual and they also did not put any strings attached to the bailout of the big banks. I remember trying to get banks to modify the loans, and they wouldn't even meet with people. People were calling the banks, and the banks would send them to someone else, and they had a caseworker that was like 10 other people.
And-
I
and-
was working to try to get the banks to speak to these people
Right.
because they wanted to pay their mortgage, but they needed it modified so they could do it, and they got no help.
And then with all those foreclosures,
Yeah. Remember the foreclosures were
was
everywhere.
it Fannie Mae
Yeah.
it ends up holding all of
Yeah.
those mortgages. They all get bundled and sold to like Deutsche Bank
Yep.
and all these people, and the banks held on to these properties as monetary investments, many times not even fixing the homes up to
Yeah.
re-rent them.
Right.
And by the time they do, the prices has
Yeah.
escalated on those properties.
Right.
And I would bet you that today, the banks and the corporations are still the largest owners of single-family homes around, which has escalated the actual real estate price.
Yeah. I mean, the homeless crisis is a housing crisis.
Yes.
It just is. We have not been able to have enough stock of homes, apartments that people can afford to buy and to rent. They cannot afford these places. And it all started, I think, in 2008. So it's really unfair. People want us to solve this problem sort of overnight. You know, people always, what are you doing about the homeless crisis? And we're doing a lot. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to solve it overnight. There is a huge reason a lot of these people
Right.
lost everything.
But is there anything, any tool that the county government can do to reverse this kind of influence on the housing market, where these large corporations still maintain these portfolios and are not selling them to individual homeowners? Because we all know that the creation of wealth in the middle class has always come because of ownership in a single family home.
Right.
And now we have a generation
Right. Who've lost generational wealth.
that have lost
Right.
generational wealth and lost a generation of income, basically, by homelessness.
Correct. Like, you know, that's certainly something the county, our, consumer and business affairs, our economic development department looks at those things. But, you know, that was my driving force behind returning Bruce's Beach
Ah, yes.
to the descendants of Will and Charles Bruce,
Right.
because it was all about generational wealth in the African American community. Here was Will and Charles Bruce in 1920s, early 20s, bought this beachfront property in Manhattan Beach, turned it into a beach resort for African Americans. At that time, there's only 2 beaches really in this area where African Americans could swim, enjoy their day at the beach. It was Inkwell in Santa Monica, and it was Bruce's Beach in Manhattan Beach. And the city, the very white city of Manhattan Beach, could not handle this much success happening to an African American couple. Took the property illegally, and the
Right.
rest is history, right?
But you were
I gave it-
you were the first politician to bring it up as and that transfer back is unique.
First time in the history of the world that a government ever gave back a piece of property to an African American family that was stolen, by nefarious means. But when we handed that deed to the great great grandson of Will and Charles Bruce, at that moment, would we have ever? Because it wasn't just an injustice to Will and Charles Bruce, right? It was to the generations who
Right.
most certainly would have been millionaires owning that piece of property in Manhattan Beach. Today, there would have been hotels. The wealth would have been enormous. We'll never be able to pay that back. But the fact that we gave them their property, they ended up selling it back to the county for $20 million. And I think maybe now they can start again with something that they can begin to create.
But this also
But yeah,
kind of started the
yeah.
conversation locally. but then statewide about reparations, which is an ongoing issue that has been, I mean, they set up their own commission and all
Yeah,
that.
they had a
and
task force. Yeah,
and even
they gave recommendations about.
even Senator Bradford
was on it. Yeah.
Wasn't he the chair of that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think our country has struggled with that restitution and reparations. I know there was a bill in Congress every 2 years by Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas about setting aside, you know,
20 acres and a mule.
Yeah, $20 billion or something for
Yeah.
reparations. It never passed. It never got to a president's desk. But this is why I like Bruce's Beach, because I think I showed this is what it could look like, and the sky didn't fall. The world didn't fall apart.
The lawyers freaked out, and
everybody,
and the assessor's office is pulling
everyone
their
went
hair
crazy.
out. Yeah.
But and then
But it worked.
It worked, and people said, "Well, where does it end? Are you going to give?" And I always, when somebody said that to me, I said, "Why don't we begin?"
And see where
and then see
Yeah.
where it ends later. I'm not going to worry about where it ends. Why don't we just start with one family that we can actually return their property to them?
Well, I always thought that what should happen out at Angels Gate is that some of the property should be returned to the Gagliano
Yeah.
Indians
Yeah.
so that they could build a casino.
Yeah.
And then we'd talk about generational
Yeah.
wealth for a while.
You're right. You're
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I think
But I think the neighbors out there would probably have a conniption
something
fit.
to say. Well, you share it, right? You share the wealth. That's how you bring people along. You offer something back to the community and the neighborhood.
Right.
Anyway.
So, without further ado, I'm going to end this interview with one comment, which is that not only do I think that you are still the most qualified person to be the supervisor for this 4th district, but we are, as a newspaper, again, endorsing your campaign and your
Thank you. That makes me very happy.
your candidacy.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Allen. It's a good endorsement. And to be honest with you, I couldn't imagine going into my last race without carrying the banner of the Random Lengths newspaper. It just wouldn't have seemed right. And your readers are fantastic, and they can put me over the top.
well, let's hope that happens in the primary.
Yes.
And I hope this alleviates your anxiety over having an unscripted
Kind of.
interview with.
Thank you. Thank you, James. We have a
Myself.
lot of work to do together. Let's get to it.
I believe so. So, once again, James Preston Allen with Supervisor Janice Hahn, July 14th, 2024. And we thank you for watching, and we hope that you go out and vote.